Don't play in the woods. My story takes place in a small town in central Arkansas. During the summer of 2012, I was hanging out with a couple of my friends in town. The day was very uneventful and boring, and my friends and I don't handle boring very well. We decided to hop in my truck and go for a drive to see if we could find a party or something else going on that evening. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when we decided to drive around. We drove around town for the better part of an hour and found absolutely nothing to do, so we thought it would be a good idea to start checking out the surrounding towns in the county. The closest town was Vilonia, a small town mainly inhabited by hunters and farmers, so we went there first. Once we got there, I immediately drove towards the outskirts, where it was more likely to find a social gathering of some sort. After a little more driving around, we decided to give it a rest and call it a day. On the way back, though, one of my companions told me to stop the vehicle because he thought he'd seen something of interest. Wanting more than anything to have something entertaining to do, I complied. I stopped, turned around, and drove slowly, until my friend pointed out what he had seen. I pulled off to the shoulder, and the three of us exited the vehicle to see a narrow, mostly unnoticeable foot trail no wider than 2.5 feet wide. I looked at my friends, and they looked back at me with intrigue and curiosity in their eyes. We talked about it for a few minutes, debating whether or not the trail was private property. In the end, we decided to see where the trail led anyways. It was around 6 or 7 in the afternoon by the time we reached the end of the trail, and at the end, in a clearing, sat an old, structurally unsound-looking cabin. I got a weird vibe from the place as soon as I saw it. My friends, on the other hand, were all about going inside to look around. I objected to doing that immediately by saying, "What if somebody lives there?" But to my dismay, both of my friends pointed out that there was no door. It was fallen on the ground in front of the cabin, as if it had been removed and left to the elements. Once inside, all I could smell was dirt and mold and other earthly smells. We also discovered that the cabin was bigger than what it looked like on the outside. There were 4 rooms, a front room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. Also, it wasn't empty. The whole cabin had furniture and personal effects. If everything hadn't been covered in dirt, dust, and other things, you would think that somebody did, in fact, live there. Given this, we each decided to check out a different room. Darren, the one who noticed the trail, took the front room. Zach took the kitchen, and I took the bedroom. The bedroom, like the rest of the cabin, wasn't at all outstanding. In fact, it was very quaint, as one would expect from a cabin. I got to looking around the room, picking things up and examining them. I looked around for maybe 5 minutes when I noticed a change in the air. Suddenly, the air in the room felt thick and heavy, and I found it harder to breathe. At first, I thought I was getting sick or something, but then I felt it. Someone was behind me. Right over my shoulder, I could feel hot breath running down the back of my neck, and I could hear breathing. I turned around, but no one was there, but I could still feel that eerie, unsettling presence. No sooner than I had turned around, I was joined by Zach and Darren, who asked me if I had felt something like a heavy weight on my shoulders. I told them that I had. I was about to tell them about whatever it was that had been standing behind me when what was probably the most terrifying thing in my life happened to me. The pressure returned, and I felt my feet leave the ground. The next thing I knew, I was flying through the air and crashing through a mostly intact window. The combined impact of the window and hitting the ground knocked the wind out of me. I was conscious a few more seconds, then I blacked out. I wish to this day I could blame what happened on my friends. But how can I? How can I blame someone for throwing me out of a window when neither one of them were standing within arm's reach of me? I have no way of explaining this phenomenon, other than that it had been an angry spirit of some kind. Maybe it didn't like me going through that bedroom, or maybe it didn't want any of us in the cabin. I don't know. But I did go back to where Darren found the trail a few weeks later. Against my better judgment, I started down the trail to the cabin. But when I got there, And this is the part that a lot of you probably aren't going to believe me. The cabin wasn't there. It was as if the cabin never existed. There was no evidence that anything had ever been there, and I'm positive that it wasn't a vivid dream or anything like that, because my friends remember it. I haven't had any paranormal or supernatural encounters since, and I hope I never do. Singing ghost. I had a job as a parking attendant once, and I wouldn't finish work until around 12:30 to 1:30 a.m. Nothing unusual would happen at work. Instead, it would happen on my drive home. I would be pretty tired by the time my shift was over. I needed to find different things to keep my mind active, so I wouldn't fall asleep as I drove. Most times I would turn on the radio and sing a bit wildly. There was one time that I actually had backup. I was cruising along singing a song called Santeria by Sublime. I was getting pretty into it, and as I came upon the chorus, I heard from my back seat an extra pair of vocals. It creeped me out, but I didn't turn around. I just sat quietly waiting for the voice to start again. Nothing. Thinking it was my imagination, I started singing again. What I really want to know, my baby, to my surprise, the other voice sang again too. This time, I sang a bit longer, making like I didn't hear it. I then stopped real abrupt in the middle of some lyrics. The voice continued on for another line all by itself. This time I knew I wasn't imagining it, and someone must have been in the car with me. I slowed down to a stop, turned on my cabin lights, and peered behind my seat. No one was there. For the rest of the drive home, I was completely awake and silent. I had no idea what had just happened or how to explain it. My first experience with something inside my car with me, but not my first experience with phantom voices. Any other people had this occur to you? Cruising with the boys. A few months ago, I got my provisional license, and my dad gave me his old 1989 Ford Fairlane. Everything was fine, and I was enjoying my newfound freedom. I decided to try to spruce the car up a little, so I went to the closest wreckers to try and find some parts for my car. I wandered around for a little while, trying to find a car with parts that would fit mine. I found a gold-colored 89 Fairlane. It was totally destroyed. The entire driver's side of the car had been pushed in. The boot had been completely torn off its hinges. Some of the doors looked like they needed to be cut open, and to top it off, there were dark smudges all over the interior. I pulled off the parts I needed and took them to the counter. The guy behind the counter asked which car I'd taken the parts off, and when I told him, he said, "You're pretty game, mate." He then explained to me that a few years ago, the car had been involved in a fatal accident. He didn't know the details, but he said he thought that it happened in one of the nearby towns. I kinda shrugged it off, paid for my parts, and went home. I put on all of my parts and was pretty proud of my work. Then, the weird stuff started happening. Driving home from TAFE one night, the electrical system started playing up. The headlights would flicker for a moment, cut out completely, then come back on high beam. The interior light would turn itself on and off. The radio would change stations or volume or even drop out completely. I'm studying auto electrics, so I thought I'd try and have a crack at fixing it myself. When it kept on happening, I took it to an auto electrician who's tested everything and said there was nothing wrong with the car. I realized that everything that was mucking up had come off the gold wreck, and decided that maybe the bloke from the wreckers had been on something. Sure enough, after a little research, I found several news articles. Most of them had a graphic photo of the car that had donated its parts to mine. The story was that in late 2009, a group of young guys, 15 to 18 years old, guys my age, were at a party. At the end of the night, a few of them were too drunk to drive their own cars, so the owner of the Fairlane decided to try and do the right thing and ferry some of them home. Here in Queensland, we have a law that pea platters can't carry more than one person after 11 p.m. He had 4 passengers, plus 2 of his friends who had jumped into the boot of his car, hoping to pull a prank on the driver. Trying to get his friends home before he got pulled over, he decided that he wanted to take a back road to the house a few of his passengers were staying at. About halfway there, he was T-boned by an elderly drunk driver trying to avoid being breathalyzed. The car flipped several times, finally coming to a rest at the bottom of a gully. Of the 7 people in the car, 5 of them were killed. The 2 in the boot were killed almost instantly. The rear driver's side passenger seatbelt was severed in the initial crash and he was thrown from the car. The 2 other rear passengers were crushed when the roof collapsed. They died a few days later in the hospital. Miraculously, both the driver and the passenger walked away without a scratch. Several of the pictures show the blood-soaked interior, and it occurred to me that the dark stains on the upholstery hadn't been oil or grease. A couple of days later, sick of the electrical gremlins, I finally yelled out, "Will you guys just knock it off?" The car suddenly completely died. It refused to start, and despite checking everything, it just would not start. After an hour or so, I noticed that the clock had turned on again, but instead of the actual time, it read 11:37, the time the crash happened. This took place at about 3 in the afternoon. All electrical issues stopped, and haven't happened since. But there haven't been just electrical anomalies. One day my mom borrowed the car while hers was being serviced. When she got home from the shops, she asked if I ever seen anything funny in the back of the car. When I replied that some nights I thought I could see shadows on the back seat, she replied, "What about an arm?" She then told me that, on her way home, she stopped at a red light. She swore she saw an arm poking out the speaker of the parcel shelf. When I told her one of the boys who was in the boot had got his arm stuck in the hole for the speaker, she just went pale. Other people have seen things in my car as well. I turned up at a party one night. When I walked up to a friend of mine, she asked where all the people in my car had gone. She swore black and blue that when I had driven past her, there had been a car load of people with me. I'm still a bit uneasy driving at night. There is a definite presence in the car, although I've never found it to be frightening. A bit frustrating, sure, but in the end, as long as they don't mess with my lights, they're cool to ride along. I saw something unbelievable in the woods. Throwaway because this sounds absolutely insane, and people I go to school with knows my Reddit username. I know this sounds totally crazy, and I probably wouldn't believe it if it did not happen to me, but I've never been a believer in the paranormal. But honestly, I just have no idea what to make of what happened last night. I will say again before you read this, it sounds insane, but please know I am telling the truth. I wasn't drunk or high, and I was with a friend who saw the exact same thing. I go to college at a smallish school in Wisconsin. One thing this school is known for is having crazy parties out in the surrounding woods. I know it's stupid, but it's one way to make sure that campus PD don't come in and shut it down. I haven't ever gone to these parties. I've had difficulty with anxiety, but after 2 years of therapy and medication, I finally decided that I wanted to go to at least one party before I graduate. I am a senior. So anyways, I talked to my friend Gina, who's known as a bit of a party girl, and she tells me there's gonna be a big party in the woods this Thursday. A lot of kids at my school don't have class on Friday, and we make plans to go. So last night, me and her head out down a trail into the woods with flashlights, and we joke about how creepy it was. Everything is going smoothly at first until we go down a smaller trail that was only about 2 feet wide instead of the normal road-sized trails that usually go through the woods. I was kind of freaked out, but didn't say anything because I assumed she knew where she was going. So we followed this trail a little bit longer and eventually come to a sort of clearing where the trees aren't too dense, and we see a towel and a few bottles on the ground. At this point, my friend tells me that she got a bit turned around but knows that we're close to the party because she's been at this clearing before, and she starts calling out "hey," hoping somebody will hear her and shout back. When this doesn't work, she takes out her phone and calls one of her friends that she said was gonna meet at the party. The friend answers, and the friend apparently tells her where they are. Gina then tells me that she knows where they are and that we're close. I joke that she better not get me killed, and as we nervously laugh, we hear a "nya, nya, nya" sound coming from behind us, followed by what sounded like a cross between a whistle of an old train and somebody blowing. It sounds stupid, but almost like the whistle of Thomas the Train. And we turn around thinking, what the fuck was that? And shine our flashlight on a deer, standing up on its hind legs with one arm against the tree looking at us. I know this sounds stupid, but just the way that it was watching us and standing there was the most unsettling thing I've ever seen in my life. My friend then takes off running, and I'm still just standing there looking at it, trying to make heads or tails of it, before I start running too after Gina, trying not to be left alone with this thing. Luckily for me, Gina runs into a tree and I catch up with her and start yelling at her about leaving me alone when we hear another whistling sound out of the left of us and turn our flashlights to see another deer looking at us. But this one is walking towards us on its hind legs, but not like a person, like a dog. It gets close but walks behind a tree with only its head and neck poking out, watching us. I have never been so scared in my life and start to cry and start to yell at Gina, telling her to call the cops. At this point, I honestly thought I was going to die. I was just so scared, and we heard another whistle sound somewhere else in the woods behind us. We heard a rustling sound in the woods and were sure that this was it. We were going to die, but instead, out walked a giant, and I mean giant, like Newfoundland size, but with short hair like a lab, black dog. The dog then walked right up to us, looked at us, and looked out at the deer behind the tree, which then started to make a neigh, neigh sound, like we heard earlier. But the dog just stood there looking at it, not growling or barking or anything, just staring. The deer then started to make a coughing sound, but the dog just stared at it without making a noise before turning around and just ignoring it and walking over to us and started barking and baying. A minute later, a professor who'd I taken a class with sophomore year bursts through the brush and starts yelling at Baron, his dog, who had apparently run away into the woods. He was really confused to see us, but saw that we were crying and offered to take us back to his house and drive us back to campus. I haven't slept since that night, and have been all over the internet trying to make sense of what I saw. Edit. Baron the dog was a black cane corso. I fully intend to spoil him raw for saving my life. Edit 2. The medication I'm on is Sertraline HCl, but I've been on it for over a year now and never hallucinated, and my friend Gina is not on anything.